Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining. My name is Ross Karre. I use he and him pronouns, and I was the artistic director of the International Contemporary Ensemble until 2022. And now I'm just the percussionist of the ensemble and also a teacher at Oberlin College in Ohio. And I'm pleased to be joined by Vimbayi. Why don't you introduce yourself really quickly, Vimbayi?
Hello, I'm Vimbayi Kaziboni. I'm a conductor, and I'm currently serving as an artist in residence with International Contemporary Ensemble. And I'm here with Ross, very excited to talk about this project we're doing together, Henry Threadgill's Pathways.
Yeah, it's an exciting project, and it has a history actually that starts here at Oberlin. The piece was commissioned by the Cleveland Museum of Art and was premiered by 6 members of the Oberlin Contemporary Music Ensemble and conducted by Tim Weiss and Zuid. So it's actually its only performance history is in the winter, I believe, of 2019, might be 2018, in January at the Cleveland Museum of Art was the world premiere. And at that time, there was a conversation started between the Tom Welsh, who was the director of the Cleveland Museum of Art, and International Contemporary Ensemble about performing it someday. The pandemic delayed all of those opportunities until this December 3rd, when we can hear it at NYU Skirball, which is pretty amazing to just be patient enough to wait for this moment to happen, and also lucky that we could have you, Vimbayi, to conduct it. I'm sad not to be there in person this time, but excited for Levi Lorenzo to take on the percussion role. But I'm wondering, Vimbayi, have you worked with Henry Threadgill before? What's your history with his music?
Oh, this is my first time working with him directly and on his music. I've worked with other people who kind of delve with the kind of ideas that he's working with, but he's one of a kind in regards to the kind of the multiplicity of influence that's in his work. So this is quite a thrill for me. I spent some hours talking to him before we began rehearsals yesterday, before the project began, about a week or so prior.
Oh, great.
And just a wealth of ideas, a wealth of like this kind of openness to being shocked in music, creating scenes whereby you can be moved. You can be moved without knowing what's going to happen. It's something that's very thrilling to me about this kind of music making.
Yeah, I had the similar experience in June of 2022 with the premiere of his piece Modern Brown X in Detroit. And it was similar forces, about 16 or so musicians, including Zuid and Henry himself playing alto saxophone. And the process, I got the music, a couple weeks before the first rehearsal, and was immediately intimidated by the amount of notes to learn and the numbering system. And so there is a little bit of a lack of familiarity for most musicians entering this piece entering a piece like Henry's for the first time. Right. There's notation, but there's also customized approaches to intervallic language, to harmonic language. And so I'm curious, what has your experience been working with a kind of unique language that Henry brings to the musical space, and what was the most unfamiliar aspect of it?
Yes, I think one of the most challenging roles for me so far has been to kind of translate between the kind of two groups from different avenues of music making. Because Henry has his own individual, you can't classify him. You can't say it's jazz, you can't say it's classical. It's just all these kind of influences that he's working with. And therefore, he's had to build a system for himself that really to create the utility to do what he needs to be done musically. So as a conductor, of course, it's also my role to make sure that all the musicians and understanding what these tools are, or translating from what they might know, for example, in classical music. It's wild, Ross. There was a moment yesterday in which it sank in, the kind of work that we're doing here, in which Henry asked, he realized, there was one person without a solo, and he was trying to, Josh Morley, we didn't find a place for him to solo yet. And he wanted to find a place for him to solo. And he was like, oh man, I should have thought about this prior. So he created a moment, impromptu in the moment, just to understand the kind of mind that Henry has when it comes to music making. We found a place where the violin was quite exposed, and what he did, he says, okay, from that measure, let's play backwards. Let's play backwards to the next section. Essentially wants us to play in retrograde. And then you go back forwards, go back one measure, and then go back again, even going further. And then Josh plays a solo above all this material, and it's quite wild the kind of thinking and what the kind of acrobatic exercise that one's mind has to do to be able to accomplish what needs to be done. But it's fun because Zoe was just like, oh yeah, just go forward and then backwards, and it was. So I had to think back to my college days about retrograde. Oh yes, we're going backwards.
Yeah.
Not retrograde, invasion, which is
right, exactly.
Or invasion, right? Things like this. It's just wild and it's fun. It's really thrilling, and the music is being made in the moment. We're always preparing ourselves for the moment.
Yeah, it was interesting because when I first inquired with Henry about what the rehearsal process would be, he said, well, we'll need this amount of rehearsals. And I said, well, if the world premiere needed that many rehearsals, maybe we won't need as many this time. And I misunderstood completely. It's my ignorance, because actually the piece is remade anew every single time because of exactly those moments you just cited, where two things are really incredible about that. One is that Henry is looking out for everyone in the room.
Right.
Everyone in the room, either to have a solo or to have a moment to add their voice to the space.
Right.
And that in and of itself is phenomenal. And that much care goes into it is a pretty unique philosophy. And then the other thing is that everything is permeable, and yet it's not as if people might be sort of freely improvising a solo, but it's not the same kind of solo they would play on their own.
Right.
It's within this environment that's created, both a communal environment where you're responding to each other, but also within Henry Threadgill's harmonic and melodic language. And I found that to be remarkable last June. So it sounds like it's happening already in yesterday's first rehearsal.
It really is. And there's something to be said about that, the contrast of the work that we are usually doing, in which the score is sacred. It's the same in Henry. The score is very sacred, but there's more. There's more than what you're seeing. Which is really fun. So you're always being surprised in the rehearsal process, and I imagine in the performances as well. Is that we also surprise each other. We're surprised by where we get to. But I've been thinking about this since last night, Ross, about how the score is very sacred to us. Like when you read a Beethoven a symphony, you want to do everything that it says, and it's been the same way with this piece, but much more is brought to it. So it becomes even better. The
Absolutely.
Score, which is brilliant to me.
It reminded me, when in June working on the piece, it sort of reminded me of those moments you have in rehearsal where you realize that two pages were stuck together. And then you open the page, peel the pages apart, and you realize there's all this other music. And that other music comes by way of really just saying, Henry Threadgill saying, play it in retrograde, play it backwards.
Right.
And it's not like you play it like, you played a recording backwards.
Right.
You have to make a new phrase logic, a new way of expressing it based on reading the notes in reverse.
That's right.
And it's cognitively difficult, but by no means impossible.
Right.
So it's also just a way of saying, well, here's the thing we could do, let's try it.
Right.
And he's tried that for decades, and he knows that he can have a band do it kind of on the fly. It's a very, very cool thing to see. And it surprised each member of the band usually is surprised in themselves. It's like, oh,
right.
Didn't realize I could do that.
Right. Well, because you have to get over the hurdle, the intellectual hurdle. But once you get over it and you listen, it's profound, really profound music.
Yeah.
And there's something the other things that surprise me about his again, this has to do with just kind of this kind of unclassifiable aesthetic of Henry's music. But there's a moment in which there's groove, but there's one point in which it was like a pointillistic groove, in which it's groovy, but each person is playing 1-2 notes maximum in a measure. That adds to this kind of ostinato kind of groovy thing. And it was wild for the first time hearing that. So that's the thing, is that I can't associate anyone else with this kind of musical moments, which is for me quite thrilling. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's thrilling, and it's also each person finds a new side of their playing characteristics, of their voice.
Right.
I find that to be kind of the combination of these two things, of Henry making a space for everyone in the room, and also making opportunities with just by turning the thing upside down, or just like
Right.
turning a new page and saying, if we looked at it from the reverse of the page and shown
Right.
light through it, like a transparency.
Right.
It's really like a prismatic almost. You just get to see through so many different lenses.
Right.
But I'm curious, just from a practical perspective, what do you as a conductor do in this particular piece? Because sometimes Henry conducts himself.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
and
Right.
then in this case, you're a conductor. What are how much is on the page? How much is off the page for you?
So for me, it was important to make sure that what's on the page is heard, right? Everything that's on the page is coming across. So in my studying of this work, first of all, there was some new things I had to learn. How he works with time is utterly fascinating. For example, you play a certain materials, written materials, in which it's my job to make sure that that's coming across perfectly. Everything's in tune, everything's in time, the phrasing is correct and such, all those things that I'm used to doing. But then we go back and repeat it, and then there's something that he calls long time, in which now you're playing the same material twice as long in each measure. So that the harmony slows down suddenly. So it's familiar to the audience. The harmonic progression is familiar, although kind of disorienting actually. And then that's when he calls it the chorus. That's when people can solo about this harmonic progressions. So things like this are things that I had to learn to prepare to be able to talk to the ensemble about this music, about understanding each aspect, some of these aspects of what Henry's trying to do. So that was a big part of it. Big part of kind of my preparation for this. And of course, it was essential to be in dialogue with them, in trying to understand all these things. The harmonic element in which, for example, he asks you to improvise, but it doesn't just say play something. He gives you intervals to work with, right? And his system is quite unique, in which he says -2 + 6, right? So play an interval that goes down to semi chromatic notes, and one that goes up 6 chromatic notes.
Yeah,
it's something that you really have to understand, so that you can be able to translate it immediately as you see it. So that's something that, so also creating exercises in rehearsal in which we get used to all these ideas, playing in retrograde. Like I had to create an exercise to say, okay, now we're going backwards and we'll stop at this place, and like people have to reorient themselves. It's been quite fun, I must say. It's a really fun. You feel like you're playing in the kind of naive sense, juvenile sense. You're really playing together. You're discovering things together. You're really probing into new ideas, and then except with the exception that what comes out feels profound, like what you hear. So that's been a thrill.
It is the it's a type of work that is familiar to us when we do either workshops with composers where we don't have a specific outcome or deadline. We're just finding a common language. And so that's pretty common to the International Contemporary Ensemble's work in devising a new piece. And the other is more precisely the character of devised work, which is that we're all going into the room without a score or a script. And we know that at the end of our process, there will be a piece, but we won't necessarily have a bunch of paperwork along the way of notation or scores or things like that. So there's a little bit of familiarity there, but what it comes down to, the part that becomes slightly intimidating out the outset, is you hear a lot of terms thrown around, some of which might be like, if he says the head or the chorus, it might be familiar to some jazz folks who are used to reading from lead sheets, and that kind of structure is common to a lot of different tunes. Then there are things like from classical or analytical words like retrograde and inversion, and then there's this temporal language that you described, long time and all this other stuff. and the intervallic language, which is numbered in integers. And so there's so many things unique to the process, but not so much, not so deep, not so verbose that it becomes insurmountable. You can still, in a 4-hour rehearsal, find common language within it, which is just amazing.
Absolutely. We didn't want to stop. There's a moment in which we'd gotten to the end about an hour before rehearsal should have ended, and we just didn't want to stop. Once you're in it, you don't want to leave, because you get to a very creative space. And one of the most beautiful elements to me about this project is that we have people who are coming from very diverse musical backgrounds. So when Henry says, you take your solo here, he's not expecting any harmonic language and any sort of aesthetic improvisation, aesthetic language from you. He just wants you to improvise. So you really bring yourself, which is, of course, a big part of improvisation. But there's also, as we know, in bebop, there's a style of improvising in early bebop and late bebop, right? But in this case, there's such a multiplicity of influences that everyone is bringing themselves. So the aesthetic is really unclassifiable in a way that's very difficult actually to discern, but very meaningful. You feel it, and there's a bit of cognitive dissonance that comes with it. That's quite lovely, at least for me as a listener. Yeah,
absolutely. And while stylistically there are things that one can lean on, if you were to do preparation for rehearsal, you would of course like understand what Henry's recordings are and what Henry Threadgill's history is, and which pieces and albums, and the Pulitzer Prize winning piece In for a Penny, In for a Pound would just be something that you would have listened to, at least scan through YouTube to check it out, and that would kind of help. But the rest of it is really feeling confident to just express what you want. And if Henry wants you to rein it in a certain direction, sort of steer the ship a bit so that it doesn't become incoherent or so heterogeneous that it's diffuse, he will make a comment. It'll be a super welcoming and gentle comment too, because he does want to hear the whole group and all its voices. And at the same time, there's a certain improvisational direction you could take it that would be somehow inappropriate. And we don't speak about that, but I wonder, what if we did crack that open? What if you were to bring that up in rehearsal and say, well, if I were to just improvise over a continuo in the style of Baroque music, right, would that work? And I wonder if that would have a place in a piece like this.
That is fascinating. Maybe I'll create some gorillas in the ensemble to do some things and see what happens.
No, I think there's like an improvisatory sabotage, to right. avoid. But there's some sort of stylistic instinct, but it's so broad that it's not subservient to norms of genre and style that one could then musicologically write about in a dissertation or something. That would be too limited a way of describing it. But instead, it comes across as, well, I don't know. So, if you were asked to analyze the stylistic breadth of what you experienced last night, what words would you need? How would you even start?
That's the thing. I've been thinking about this. That's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, and that's why some of the words I was finding, like when I was talking about the groove, this kind of pointillistic groove. To me, those words, my experience, come from different worlds, from my musical experience. They come from different places, and in Henry's music, they're there, and it's just normal. This is just a second two. So it's very difficult, and I think that I end up finding myself in this kind of binary place of contradictions. I get to a place of just contradictions. Jazz is too limiting. Classical is too even avant-garde is limiting, because avant-garde what, right? Every kind of classification I could think of with this kind of music is very limiting. And I think that actually that even the listener brings what they want beyond musicians themselves. I think even the listener, based on your own experiences of listening to certain musics, I think that you inevitably we see ourselves in this kind of work.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I was also thinking about my work as a conductor. When you're conducting a symphony, you're taught to think from measure one to the last movement, the last measure. You're thinking about the really big picture. But of course, because this is densely infused with places of improvisation where people bring a certain energy that you cannot anticipate. You just can't predict where the piece will go. We have certain markers that keep us together, but really where it goes in kind of a spiritual sense, there's just no way of knowing. So there's something that's also interesting, at least for my work, and I guess I suppose for all the musicians, not knowing exactly where we end up, but just there for the ride.
Yeah, absolutely. The more of the go along for the ride, but bring your full self to that ride, the better in situations like this. And I think that's the case for the audience too. If an audience member comes to a performance, let's say this Saturday at Skirball, and comes in with a lot of elements of confirmation bias coming from whatever level of profiling, in the most sinister level of profiling, or even just, well, I know I'm going to see some people who I know have played jazz in the past. I know I'm going to see some people who've played experimental New York downtown 2 scene improvisation before. And then you won't be surprised to hear some elements of that. So that will confirm your bias. But then you'll also find moments where you're like, well, I wasn't expecting to hear this. And in a way that creates its own meta structure. So each audience member experiences this structure of the familiar, the expected, the unexpected. And I wonder if that's its own compositional language, to surprise people, or if it's just like, this is the genuine article. And if it's surprising you, then your mind wasn't open enough,
I like that.
Well, we were about to wrap up our conversation, and unfortunately, the internet decided to do that for us. So we lost Vimbayi just then, but it was great to have you all listening to us in the office hours here as a part of the NYU Skirball presentation of Zuid and International Contemporary Ensemble performing Henry Threadgill's Pathways in early December of 2022. So we will say goodbye for now and look forward to seeing you at the concert, or if you're watching this in the distant future, I hope you got to catch the event, and if not, please look for events at Skirball with the International Contemporary Ensemble and with Zuid and Henry Threadgill in the future. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.